Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel Medical Learning with Amit Khawat. Today we are going to discuss about cerebrospinal fluid and the ventricular system part 3. So let's start. In the last lecture we discussed about the functions of cerebrospinal fluid, and in this lecture we will discuss about the features of cerebrospinal fluid. So, the first feature of cerebrospinal fluid is the volume. The volume of CSF is approximately equal to 130 ml. Then, the second feature of cerebrospinal fluid is the daily production of CSF. So, the daily production of CSF is about 550 ml per day. That means every minute .5 milliliters of CSF is produced. Then the third feature of cerebrospinal fluid is the pressure. The pressure of CSF can be detected by doing lumbar puncture. So, according to lumbar puncture, the pressure of CSF is about 60 to 160 milliliters of water. So the pressure of CSF is about 60 to 160 ml of water. Then the fourth feature of cerebrospinal fluid is the composition of CSF. To know the composition of CSF, we should take a sample of it. And to take a sample of CSF, we again need to do lumbar puncture. So, if lumbar puncture is so important, then the needle of lumbar puncture passes through 5 structures and enters in the subarachnoid area and takes a sample of cerebrospinal fluid. So now I list those 5 structures from which the needle of lumbar puncture passes through. The first structure is the skin. Or the cutaneous fiber. Or tissue. And after the skin, the needle of lumbar puncture will pass through few ligaments which are in the spinal cord. So, there are 3 major ligaments, and these ligaments are the spinous ligament, then the intraspinous ligament, and after the intraspinous ligament, the extraspinous ligament is present. So first is the extraspinous, and then intraspinous, and then the spinous. So these three ligaments are present in the spinal cord and the vertebra. After the ligaments, the needle of lumbar puncture will pass through the epidural area. So in the brain there is a potential epidural area, but in the spinal cord there is a real space between the two layers of dura mater. Epidural space. In the spinal cord, there is real space present between the two layers of dura mater, the periosteal layer of dura mater and the meningeal layer of dura mater. After the epidural layer of dura mater, the needle of lumbar puncture will pass through the dura mater. And after the dura mater, it will pass through the arachnoid mater. And after arachnoid mater, the subarachnoid area is present. So it will enter in the subarachnoid area. And then this needle will collect the sample of cerebrospinal fluid. And then we will check the composition of cerebrospinal fluid. Now, before doing lumbar puncture, we should check the intracranial pressure of cerebrospinal fluid, because if we do lumbar puncture, when the pressure of CSF in the subarachnoid area or intracranial pressure is high, then it can harm our central nervous system. So before doing lumbar puncture, we should check if the pressure of CSF in the subarachnoid area or intracranial pressure is high or low. So to check if the intracranial pressure is high, then there are few factors. The first factor is there must be a history of headache if the intracranial pressure is high. There must be a history of headache. Any headache before the patient wakes up is the history of headache, and the headache can be mild or severe. It should be considered serious. So the headache can be mild or serious before the patient wakes up. It should be considered serious. Then it can be any unexplained headache. It can be any unexplained headache. So if there is any headache before the patient wakes up, it can be mild or severe. It should be considered serious, and it can be any unexplained headache when the patient wakes up. This was the first factor of intracranial pressure. Now, the second factor of intracranial pressure is papilledema. Papilledema. So, what is papilledema? So, when we do ophthalmoscopy, we look on the retina and the optic disc through ophthalmoscope through the pupil. We look through the pupil on the retina and the optic disc through the ophthalmoscope. When we look on the retina and the optic disc, it looks something like this. And from the optic disc, the optic nerve is connected with our eyes, or optic disc is the origin of optic nerve. So here is retina and this is optic disc. Now, in a normal person, the margins of optic disc are clear and sharp. So, the margins of optic disc in a normal person are clear and sharp. But in a patient who have papillary edema, the margins of optic disc are blurred when we look through the ophthalmoscope. So this is how the optic disc looks in a patient who have papillary edema by the ophthalmoscope. These margins of optic disc are called papilla. So these margins are called papilla. And in a patient who have papillary edema, the papilla is blurred, and this is called edematous in papilla. Edematous in papilla. So this is called papilla, and here in this diagram, this is the edematous in papilla. Now, how does this edematous in papilla or papillary edema occur? So now I'll draw a side view of central nervous system. So here is the central nervous system, and here is an eyeball. this is the structure of one eyeball. Here is the pupil. At the front end, here is the pupil, and this is a side view of our eye. Now, the optic nerve is connected over here, and here would be the optic disc. So here is the optic nerve. Now I'll draw the third meningeal layer or dura mater in this diagram. So here is the dura mater. And this area is the subarachnoid area over here, and in the subarachnoid area the cerebrospinal fluid is present. Now a layer of dura mater extends till the eyeball and covers our optic nerve. So this is a layer of dura mater, and because all the three meningeal layers are covering our optic nerve, then CSF also follows these three meningeal layers and covers our optic nerve. Now here is a very important point. Because the three layers of meninges are covering our optic nerve, and all the central nervous system tracts are covering the all the central nervous system tracts are covered by these three layers of meninges including CSF. That is why optic nerve should not be considered as a nerve. Optic nerve should be considered as a central nervous system tract. And another proof is, for example, here is the optic nerve. Then optic nerve is myelinated or covered. Optic nerve is myelinated or covered by special type of cells called oligodendrocytes. And here is a peripheral nerve. For example, this is a peripheral nerve. Then peripheral nerves are myelinated by other type of cells called Schwann cells. Because all the central nervous system tracts, including optic nerve, is myelinated by oligodendrocytes. That is why optic nerve should be considered as a central tract, not a peripheral nerve. And all the diseases related to oligodendrocytes will also harm optic nerve, and all the diseases related to Schwann cells will harm only our peripheral nerves, not optic nerve, because optic nerve is myelinated by oligodendrocytes. So here are two major points why optic nerve should be considered as a central tract, not a peripheral nerve. Now, here are central retinal arteries. These are central retinal arteries which supply blood to our retina. And here are central retinal veins which drain the blood from our retina So these central retinal arteries and veins pass through subarachnoid area and all the three layers of meninges to supply and drain the blood from our eye. Now, if there is raised intracranial pressure, then these arteries and veins are passing through intracranial area or the subarachnoid area, and because of that the pressure of CSF is high. Because the pressure of CSF is high, these arteries and veins are compressed, but because the blood flow in artery is higher than the blood flow in veins, arteries are not compressed because the blood pressure in arteries are higher than the blood pressure in veins. But the blood pressure in veins is lower, and that is why when these veins drain the blood from a retina, then these veins are compressed because of high intracranial pressure. And this is why papillary edema occurs. Because these central retinal veins are compressed by the high pressure of cerebrospinal fluid in the subarachnoid area. Now, we will discuss about the third factor of raised intracranial pressure. And the third factor is projectile vomiting. Digestive system regulating centers of vagus nerve are present in medulla oblongata. So, the gastrointestinal tract regulating centers are present in medulla oblongata, and these are the branches of vagus nerve or the 10th cranial nerve. So, because of high intracranial pressure, these regulating centers are disturbed, and that is why the branch of vagus nerve which nerve supply our digestive system is disturbed, and because of that projectile vomiting occurs. Gastrointestinal tract regulating centers of vagus nerve in medulla are disturbed because of high intracranial pressure. And that is why there is disturbance in the branch of vagus nerve which nerve supply our GIT or gastrointestinal tract, and that is why projectile vomiting occurs. Now, the fourth factor of high intracranial pressure is progressively increasing blood pressure. For example, here is one artery which supply blood towards central nervous system. Now, because of high intracranial pressure, this artery is compressed, but central nervous system needs blood. So, the blood pressure increases, then this artery will not compress because of the high intracranial pressure. And if the blood pressure is high, this artery will not compress and can supply blood to our central nervous system. So, progressively increasing blood pressure is due to arteries which are compressed by high intracranial pressure or high pressure of cerebrospinal fluid in subarachnoid area. Now, the fifth factor and the last factor of high intracranial pressure is progressively falling pulse rate. Again, this is because of vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is a cardio inhibitor, which means it decreases the cardiac activity and the arterial activity. So, because vagus nerve is a cardio inhibitor, it inhibits or decreases the activity of heart and the cardiac system. So, cardio inhibitor means it inhibits or decreases the cardiac activity which occurs in the cardiac system. And when the vagus nerve is disturbed, the branch of vagus nerve fires, and because it fires, this branch inhibits the cardiac activity and the pulse rate decreases. Let me recap about raised intracranial pressure. So, the first factor of raised intracranial pressure is there would be a history of headache. Any headache before the patient wakes up, it can be mild or severe. It should be considered serious. It can be any unexplained headache before the patient wakes up. Now, the second factor of raised intracranial pressure is papillary edema. In papillary edema, the papilla or the margins of optic disc are blurred when we look through the ophthalmoscope. So here is the optic disc and here is the retina. And this is the retina of a normal person. But in the patient who have papillary edema, the optic disc, when we look through the ophthalmoscope, is blurred. Because the central retinal vein is not able to drain the blood from the retina to our heart because of high intracranial pressure in the subarachnoid area. So this is edematous in papilla. And this is called papillary edema, and this is the papilla, and the margins of optic disc in a normal person is sharp and clear than the person who have edematous in papilla, because the central retinal vein is not able to drain the blood well from the eye to our cardiac system. Now, the third factor of raised intracranial pressure is projectile vomiting. Gastrointestinal tract or digestive system regulating centers of vagus nerve in medulla oblongata are disturbed because of high intracranial pressure, and that is why projectile vomiting occurs. Then the fourth factor of high intracranial pressure is progressively increasing blood pressure. To supply the blood to our central nervous system, arteries have a high blood pressure, because if arteries does not have a high blood pressure, then CSF will compress the arteries, and these arteries, cerebral arteries, will not be able to supply the blood to our central nervous system. Then progressively falling pulse rate. Because the vagus nerve is a cardio inhibitor, that means it inhibits or decreases the cardiac and the arterial activity. This cardio inhibiting branch of vagus nerve fires because of raised intracranial pressure, and that is why it inhibits the cardiac activity, and there is a progressive fall in pulse rate. So, till now we have covered ventricular system and how cerebrospinal fluid protects and covers our central nervous system in part 1. In part 2, we discussed about the functions of cerebrospinal fluid. And in this lecture, in part 3, we discussed about the features of cerebrospinal fluid and important factors of raised intracranial pressure. And in the next lecture, we will discuss about the composition of cerebrospinal fluid and how CSF changes from the infection of meninges. Thank you.